Hi, Karen. So, first of all, I'd like to say how grateful I am for the work that you do. In my little private philosophical system, there's like a ranking, and you're right in there with the best, in my opinion. In fact, really, frankly, I think that better even than Chomsky is this guy, Daniel Quinn, and you're like, to me, the Daniel Quinn of gender relations. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for my entire ranking system, a criterion, and it's basically depth of focus and broadness of overview. And I love the way you step back and look very deeply through the history of our gender relations and ask these questions. I think it's just fascinating and wonderful and so important. And I think the work you're doing is incredibly prescient and ahead of its time. And I especially appreciate what an incredible de facto feminist you are by being such an incredibly forward-thinking, independent-thinking woman who stands up to everyone and says what the hell she wants. I really, really admire the point that's implicitly made by no one in the feminist community acknowledging that accomplishment. You think for yourself more independently than hardly any man ever has, and certainly hardly any woman as well. Um, yeah, it's just mind-blowing. And I'm aware of the slight backhand in what I just said, and I apologize for that, but I suspect it's maybe a little bit true. Okay, so my question is along exactly the lines that you've been at pains to paint, which is a separation of a critique of feminism from a critique of women. And so going along with that, hopefully it having been made already abundantly clear that I have no personal qualms with your critique of feminism. In fact, I suspect it's largely correct. I have a question about women, because I personally get very confused. And I find myself falling for their trap of, if you don't like feminism, you don't like us. And so I find myself listening to you, and I look at the women around me, and I just feel nothing. I'm just like, nope, not interested in any of you. And I find myself, when I'm the most in love with women, when I'm the most emotionally vulnerable to women and open to women and willing to share my heart with women, I find myself falling into the feminist trap. And I start thinking that women are better. And so my question to you is, can you help me learn how, by either recommending books or philosophies, I don't know, schools of thought, a rule of thumb, some kind of basic emotional technique, something, I don't know, learn how to look a little more honestly at how women and men are and see women as people, flawed beings just like ourselves, us guys, who have their strengths and weaknesses, who are better in some ways and, less good in others, and maybe even escape that whole ranking system. Because the thing is, much as I think your analysis of feminism is probably going to prove to be ultimately one of the most correct ones yet made, I do honestly step back and I look at women and my experiences of women in my personal life, and women really can be very, very sweet, very forgiving, and in many ways much better at, well, okay, men can be just like infinitely forgiving, God to a fault, just like women can. See, this is what I'm saying. This is exactly what I'm saying. Can you help me just understand whether or not women really are, on the whole, maybe nicer or more empathetic in some ways than men are. Because, I mean, like I said, I'm genuinely confused. I look at this stuff and I'm like, okay, I see in feminism, basically, I think it's all revealed by the name. I mean, I think you kind of hit on that when you were like, okay, look at how they named the two systems in your extra material to Cassie J. You're like, okay, they basically called everything good the feminine, and they basically called everything bad the patriarchy. They're basically saying women are better than men. And so what I've come to realize is that feminism is essentially female supremacy, and that the very, very first trick in philosophical critique is listen to what people are telling you. Often, it's all in the name. Feminism, it's female supremacy. It's not that complicated. Sometimes these things are that simple. In fact, one of the guiding intuitions of science, going back to Galileo, is that things are very simple. So you look at, just to take one more example for this point, you look at humanism. In fact, it looks to me like the worship of the human. It's basically a kind of human supremacy. So they're trying to embrace equality because they're looking at all humans. Humanism seeks in its idealistic forms. I mean, Sam Harris hardly practices this with regard to his attitude toward Middle Eastern people. But, I'm sure Sam Harris would call himself a humanist, but does he really practice humanism is another question. But is humanism itself really a very sane philosophy is yet another question. And I would say that, like feminism, it reveals itself, it plays its whole card right there in the name. I mean, it says it, it's the worship of, it's, I don't know, it's saying the human is just the only thing worth really admiring or something like that. So feminism is the same thing. And I'm just wondering, I got lost in my little lectures, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's well, yeah. So feminism is basically female supremacy. It's basically saying, women are better than men. And I feel like one of those guys that was just brought up with it from the beginning. My mom was also like a kind of a de facto Roseanne Barr feminist. And though she never called herself it, I think she had been pretty well infected with the idea that women are better. And her experience with my father didn't help that. In fact, I think that's what really kind of cemented that in. You get burned, and then you sort of blame the world of men on the way that you were treated by one of them. But it does stand to reason that maybe part of the spread of feminism was that so many women were burned by maybe a man sort of similar to my father, who was just sort of an indifferent asshole. Not particularly abusive, but I mean, I would say that in hindsight, I don't know. I don't even want to get into it, but it's like, don't men have a history of being indifferent assholes? And don't women have a history of trying to put up with it until they just can't anymore, and then something kind of breaks in them? And I'm not saying that women are better than men, but would it be fair to say that maybe in general, in a lot of relationships, women are better than men? And isn't it possible that there is something there where that there is something that feminists are confusing and that women are confusing? So women are making the same crossfade or whatever that I'm doing. They're making that same faulty connection in general when women accept feminism. I mean, first of all, okay, they're just being people. They hear something that makes them better than everybody else, and they unconsciously go, yeah, feminism, women are awesome, I'm a woman, wow, isn't that hard to analyze? That's so convenient. But then there's something else where they're looking back at the histories of their relationships, and they're seeing that they maybe were giving a little more. And I'm not saying that this is true. I'm actually open to the possibility that men just give differently, and I'm really curious your take on that. And I'm also wondering if there's something that we can confess honestly, the same way that we would really admire it if feminists who claimed to want to have a rational and reasonable discussion with us would do really well to make some confessions, to admit that the world was built by men, just like we could admit that the world was birthed by women. And so I wonder if there are any such confessions that you could make that would help me clear my head and understand. Or is it really literally just this innate delusion that you talk about, that I just literally can't help my instinct to overvalue the feminine contribution and consider women more valuable than men, innately, exacerbated by my upbringing in this sort of brainwashed culture, and by my mother, my burnt mother in particular, who was sort of bitter and, accidentally raised me to hate myself. Oops. So, yeah, that's my question. Can you help me kind of penetrate through to this, like, the difference between my personal experience of women being just, and I look back at my own history, and it's like, I have been a cold dick to a lot of women in ways that the women who were emotionally involved, women who I don't know, have been a huge cold dick to me. And so that's, if anything, I think women are, on the whole, in the public sphere, more cruel to men than men are to women, actually. But in our personal lives, I feel like it is still very often true that, I don't know, that women listen better, and that, even if it's for selfish reasons, that women are a little more sensitive to, like, what's going on with us than we are to what's going on with them. And I don't know, I just wonder what you think of all that, because I feel like there's just so much to unpack there, and I just wanted to go along with your, I really admire the way the critics of feminism are getting better and better at drawing a really sharp distinction between critiquing feminism and critiquing women. You're saying feminism is full of shit. Women might be great. Women are great, wonderful creatures. You are one. And so I'd really like to hear more about that from you, because I trust you. Thank you.